Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ATTMind Radio. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso, and this will be a audio-only episode. Now, recently I've been releasing everything via video as well on YouTube, but just due to reception issues, we're just going to focus on high-quality audio rather than glitchy audio-video. The guest today is Yalila Espinoza. She serves as an intimacy coach and integrative health educator, guiding consciousness explorers back to their hearts and sexual vitality. For the last 10 years, she has been engaged in academic studies, journeying with Amazonian plant teachers, and diverse trainings in sexuality and tantra. A spiritual erotic awakening model comprised of body-centered practices to enhance sensual liberation was inspired by Yalila's Ph.D. research into the erotic intelligence of plant teachers. She offers individual and group sessions to support entheogenic integration as well as Mind Your Heart, quote, Mind Your Heart program for business leaders. Welcome to the show, Yalila.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, I was first, introduced to your work through an episode of the Psychedelic Salon, and you were on there, and you had made mention about doing I believe a 13-month solo mushroom journey where you were doing mushrooms once a month every month. Is that correct?
Uh, Not quite.
Okay.
A little bit different, but it was a year-long journey where I was drinking plants every day, a little bit every day.
Ah, yeah, okay. So definitely missed that extra piece of information. Anyways, that's how I initially thought I had received that information, and so I got all excited. I'm like, oh, somebody else who's done the same thing that I did. This would be such a great conversation to have. However, I did not take little bits of plant medicine every day for a year. I can only imagine that would also be extremely powerful.
hmm
What can you describe that journey for us?
Describe the year journey.
Yeah, because when I was listening to your talk, it seemed like that year journey was a turning point for you. And obviously, please correct me if I'm inaccurate. But if so, like, what was that? What was that year like for you? Who were you before, and what was it that brought you to it? And who have you become from that experience?
Wow, big questions. Okay. Well, who I was before, I would say I thought was a typical being, in terms of working and in relationship and on the track of what we would deem in Western society as a normal life. And then I had some sudden transitions in my life, including the death of my partner. And that's what really led me into the world of vegetalismo and the plant teachers. And I resisted for many years, and it really took a big crisis and changes in my life to go deeper. And so it really was 4 years after drinking various plant medicines that I took this step deeper into vegetalismo and then entered into the year long, we call it the plant diet. And, but before that year long, I actually needed the 3 month isolation diet in the jungle in Peru to really clean myself and physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And honestly, it was a shock to realize how many layers of warped perception I had in terms of the trauma that I experienced as a child, and then also just being indoctrinated in various ways in normal Western capitalistic living. And so, in the jungle, I was seeing, the layers that were shedding, and, how they served me, and then what I needed to replace those gaps in order to feel more whole and remember who I was. And so it was that deep cleaning that then inspired me to go into the year journey. And, this was with the coca plant. And I was drinking coca tea every day and also tobacco. And this was primarily to clean my mental perceptions. So I can be a very heady person, not as heady as some academics, but I do enjoy visioning and um, exploring ideas and theories. And so I was able to see in that year that some of the things that I was holding on to in terms of ideas and the way that I perceived myself was actually a way of escaping the truth. And I actually had a dream during that year that was very significant in that I, was a bit egotistical in some ways, thinking that because I was in ceremonies with these different powerful sacred plants, that somehow I was seeing reality clearly. And in the dream, I was sent to an addiction rehab center, and I didn't know why I was there because, I wasn't misusing substances per se. And then I realized that it was actually my thinking that was addictive, and the negative thinking and the warped thinking. And so, in the dream, I went through this rehab program and with the plant's help, really cleansing and redefining who I was and who the world was. And so that was, I would say, the major um, learning in that year long diet process.
Hmm. Now, your models, or what I see you produce online a lot, has a lot to do with sexuality. Where did
Mm.
sexuality and the awakening of sexuality come into that year-long journey, and where does it fit right now in your models?
Great question. Yes, so it was in the 3 month isolation diet first. This was about 7 years ago that I was shown that I really needed to heal the sexual wounding that I had experienced as a child. And I was working uh, previous years as a maternity counselor, social worker in the area of reproduction. And so I realized that I was focusing so much outward on other people and helping them, and needed this time for myself to really go deep and remember, my sexual vitality. So it was that first diet process that awakened the erotic intelligence of myself. And then it was the year long with Coca that was showing me how to expand the idea of sexuality, and also how to express and be a sexual being that was very different than what I had been perceiving before. And coca, is used as a aphrodisiac, and so it made sense that I had this long period of time to really learn from the plant world what is erotic energy. And after that first year, again, the ego, shadow ego came in and like, oh, now I know something. But in fact, that was only the first step. And I went into another year long diet with coca after that. It was, I took a year off to integrate, and then another year long after that. So I really, gave this space and dedication to go deeper into that sexual exploration. And this is what led me to create the sexual erotic awakening model, and really focusing on how my experience of cleansing the different energy centers, um, and then how to reinvigorate them through different tools and exercises, both that were shown from the plant teachers and from human teachers in the Tantra realm. And so it just really was based on what supported me through the journey. And then also, talking to other people about their sexual experiences around the plant medicines, and taking what was beneficial for them and integrating that into the model. And so now, really sticking to going through the seven energy centers. I know that there's so many different models, and I just chose to stick with the basic one, stick with the seven centers, and go through each one with various, exercises and storytelling around our sexual experiences, and then integrating tools to strengthen these centers. And so it's amazing the transformation that I see happening in people that journey with me. Um, and what's also amazing is that I really see the benefit of the integration of the masculine structure and then the feminine flow. So really having a very firm model to have clients go through, but then really allowing the spaciousness for them to discover, what feels congruent in their life and what do they need. And so, both in person experiences and the online and group format together has created profound um, changes and epiphanies for people. So I'm just really excited to continue the learning and how to be supportive in this erotic realm.
I applaud you for your work. I think that the awakening of sexuality in the sense of personal sexual empowerment and ability to express our sexuality and know what our needs and our desires are without feeling shame or guilt or being held down by some past trauma is a very important journey that we should be taking individually as well as as a species. And I think in doing so, it has a really positive effect on how we relate, and thus the cultural and societal structures that we build from those manners of relation.
Hmm.
Within your model, I'm curious, what is sexual energy? What is sexuality in your model? What causes dysfunction there, and how do we move through that into discovering our own healthy expressions of sexuality?
Hmm. The primary definition of sexual energy that I immerse myself in is really connecting with the universal erotic energy, and that is the feminine and masculine energies that exist in every being, human or other than human, and that this energy is, the sun and the moon and the stars, and in terms of the plant energy, that these plants actually embody this cosmic erotic energy. And so when we are taking in the plants, that we are taking in that erotic energy, and it's showing us like where the blocks are in our body, and then actually how to revitalize these centers. And so it seems so simple, uh, and it really connecting with this energy. But what I find happening is that we get so immersed in certain patterns that we don't even see, what is happening in our bodies. We're not listening to our bodies, and therefore we're not connecting to the energy in, trees and in the grass. And there was a point where I actually, after the long year diets, that I became so sensitive and really immersing myself in the tantric teachings, in very long trainings, that just walking on the grass barefoot, I would feel ecstasy coming through my feet and sending shivers all the way up and through my head. And so I believe that as humans we can all be like this. It's just that there's so many distractions and such high stimulus, that it's actually rewiring our brains differently, so that we are almost like, the hamsters on the wheel, like we're running really fast, trying to remember this vital erotic energy, but we're not really getting anywhere. And so we have all these distractions, and then we have all these blocks. And I feel like a lot of us are numb just so that we can survive and do what we need to do to take care of, our families and be in the work world as it's set up right now. And so it's a simple definition of sexual erotic energy, and yet I would say the majority of us are not actually tuning in and experiencing the full reality of what is possible.
So you mentioned that your spiritual erotic awakening model has body-centered practices in it. What like because you've spoke a lot there about the sort of psychic side of the experience, the stresses in life, and the distractions, and say, for me, I call it like toxic information, and energy and all of these things. But you also reference that it has to do with focusing into the body. So where does the body come into this model? Hello?
Right, wonderful.
Okay.
So yes, hi. So the body being the temple, an act like real universal temple of energy, that is constantly being connected to source, or whatever you want to call it, cosmic realm, God, whatever. And so that the first step is to really pay attention to what's happening in the body, and simply focusing on, even the root chakra, our base, and our legs and our feet. So when I mentioned walking on the grass, how sensitive are we in the soles of our feet? That could be one indicator of, where we're at, in terms of how open we are to this body intelligence. And whenever I am journeying with clients with any kind of plant medicine, I always emphasize that the body is more intelligent than our minds, and that the plants are actually even more intelligent than humans. So, in fact, if we just trust that our bodies in communication with these plants are giving us really vital information, and that our responsibility is to just pay attention to what's happening, and we don't even need to analyze it too much or figure it out, but naturally we will have this embodied understanding and embodied spirituality that will support us in our daily spiritual lives.
Where does because we've spoke again about stresses and say disconnection from the innate intelligence of the body, and how its intelligence is augmented by the intelligence of that which we consume in the form of various plants, or the lack of intelligence in that which we consume in things like overly processed foods, whose lack of intelligence have a detriment or nutritive effect on the body. Where does explicit sexual trauma fit into the dysfunction in our sexuality and the limitations, as well as how does that fit into the healing process which you talk about?
Right. Okay. I missed that in part of your last question. So, the way that I understand it is that the root chakra is focused on survival, security, sense of belonging, and also our connection to our ancestral lineage. So, what can happen is that when we're born, literally in our DNA, we have the sexual memories of our mother and father and grandparents and ancestors. So, sometimes we wonder, like, why is this such an issue, in my life? I understand it logically, but it's because we actually carry it in our DNA and our psyche, most of which is in our subconscious, right? It's like more than 90% is in our subconscious. So we're actually not even aware of what's happening. And then we have the other part that where the sexual wounding comes in from, as a child or adult, it as we're growing up and whoever we're surrounded by, and watching the modeling of our parents and of our teachers, and family members, peers, etc. And so what can happen is in the root chakra, our sense of belonging and safety and security, whatever trauma or skewed energy or relationship cords happen in that root chakra, then when we bring the energy up into our second chakra, so our sexuality, our relationship to others, and our creativity. So whatever skewedness is happening in the first chakra, we bring it up and it will express itself in the second chakra. And that's where we have people who are, drawn to certain forms of addiction. So, our eating or food addiction, substance addiction, love and sex addiction, money addiction, work addiction, all of that is going to be expressed in this womb area, and it's showing us like how the energy is functioning or dysfunctioning in the root chakra. Because whatever we're doing in the second is an attempt to fulfill that sense of security and safety and belonging. And so what happens in the society is that we are so focused on the first and second chakra. Very rarely are we actually cleaning and harmonizing these first and second energies and bringing it into our third power center. And so once we actually do bring these three together in a congruent way, that's when you see the people who we're in awe of, the ones who are, living their fullest potential, and just, everything's in alignment. And it just, these three chakras are so important because they're just like the power base, and then bringing that into the heart, right? And so this is where the plant medicines come in, because the way I see it is the plants are really encouraging us, ushering us to open up our hearts so that we are bringing the lower energies and the top three chakra energies into the heart. So there's like unifying effect that happens, and so this is where, we actually have the ability to jump into the different dimensions through the heart energy. I know this is a lot, but that's just a summary of how I understand it.
Yeah, it definitely goes a bit far out for me. I haven't really identified much with the chakra model, though I do see its applications, in particular the as a means to define these different sort of characteristics or dimensions of one's potential.
Hmm.
What do you perceive of as like we spoke a lot there again about the more energetic side of things, but can you maybe speak on how sexual trauma affects and limits the body's experience of sensuality, and how one can work through that in a body-centered mindset?
Hmm. So when we have this blockage of energies, we have like these relationship cords, and we have trauma. The cordage is, it can be skewed or twisted, um, cut off. There's so many different ways that the trauma can, in our bodies, express itself. And so with this constriction, then we are actually feeling, in a traumatized way, the reality of the external world. So whatever the skewness is happening internally, it's going to be seen in the external world. And that's why we can have trauma as a child, and then somehow think that, as we're becoming adults, that we've dealt with the shame or the guilt, or the misunderstandings, um, of, sexuality, and that we've gotten over it. And so, but that's exactly the opposite, in that we still carry it in our bodies, and then we actually literally perceive the world in a skewed way based on our trauma. And so that's why we might have something in our life that happens that's very small. In some respect, it seems small, but that it can trigger, like literally activate the cellular memory and create these very, very strong emotions that are stemmed in the trauma itself. And so I have seen so many times with clients where they talk about this in therapy, in counseling training, is that the idea of projection or transference. And so many times there's something that I will do that will trigger the memory, or even the blind teachers will do, which is a good thing. It's like we have to get in there and have the memory activated, and then release the energy, and then fill that in with the truth of who we are, like what is already there. So it's more of like shedding the traumatic energy, and then that the light of the truth in us can actually expand and take that place. And so you know, this is why when we are um, journeying with folks around sexual trauma, it's a very, very sensitive and tricky area to explore. And so, what I see happening is that this trauma is activated, and too often people are not supported in the long run, and so they're actually re-traumatized and then left hanging. And, this is why I emphasize so much that people are with me for 3 to 6 months or even a year, because what can happen is, we're in ceremony together, or, in a session, and something is activated and they want to bolt, because when we go back to the survival mechanism, it's freeze, fight, or flight. And so a lot of people want to bolt, or they want to fight. And so it's really important to hold a safe container where people can go through whatever they need to, and then make sure that they're ushered to the other side in a congruent way. And this is where these journeys that people go on here and there. They go to Peru for 10 days, and it can be transformative and so healing. And so many times people need that almost crisis 911 integrative support afterwards, right? Because something has been activated, the trauma has been activated, and there's a certain way um, that you want to transform that energy. And it's really too much to go into like the details of. There's so many different tools that I've learned from master healers and also the plants, but that there is a way to guide someone through that journey, so that they can release effectively, and then bring that healing light source back into their bodies.
In my models, I also have a similar or a similar concept about going back into old stuff, going back into the old things, into the traumas, and being able to be back there with them and experience, to use Stan Groff's terms, the cumulative emotional charge of how that has affected you throughout your life, and then to surrender to them and to completely allow those emotions to have a space to be and to move, and then in turn allow an openness for something new to come in. And I like what you mentioned here, the importance of having a support structure for the healthy integration of whatever might get triggered, whether it be something positive, a positive change, or if something opens up that stays open, and what's there now is more soreness, more trauma to move through. And because I've met, and recently I've been getting a lot of connections from people who have been left worse off than they were
Mhm.
before they went to, for
Yep.
example, Peru. And it's not always because the experiences were bad. For some people, it's because the experiences were absolutely mind-blowingly
Mm.
beautiful. And in comparison to what they experienced down there, life here in the Western world is depressing and sad and lonely.
Mhm.
And so I think this integration is an extremely important aspect, and I thank you for calling that into your work. I want to shift away from sexuality a little bit, but also kind of stay with the theme, and ask you. You've been working in South America with these medicines, and it's very, I mean, it seems abundantly clear that there's a lot of sexism and male domination in the in ayahuasca culture. And I'm curious what it was like for you as a woman to go down there and dedicate yourself so deeply to this work, and any challenges that you've faced there, and the lessons that you've learned through those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking this. Well, first, I really want to bow down to all the vegetalistas and the women practitioners who have shared their love and teachings with me, and all the other female practitioners in North America. I just really have so much gratitude and love for all of them, because it is a little tricky. It is challenging, and I've seen the women who are dear friends and strong practitioners who have found their way. They found their own way of really balancing the masculine traditional ways of training and of practicing with their own feminine truth. And it is very, very challenging uh, to immerse oneself in the indigenous way. Not to say that anything is better or worse or anything like that. It's just different. And so there's a very strong machismo attitude in the vegetalismo world, where there's traditionally it was the men who were the ayahuasqueros and leaders of ceremonies, and then it was the women who were the harvesting the plants and the holders of space and ceremony, and actually the protector of the male facilitators, ceremony leaders. And so just coming out of that kind of tradition, there still remains, this thinking that the men who were very strong physically, because this is a physically demanding path as well that people forget, um, and and so the men do have can have more of like a warrior perspective, and like going into ceremony is going into a battle. And, I have had years of being in ceremonies where literally I was shaking in fear, because it did feel like war in the ceremony space. And then being able to also be in ceremonies, where there are male and female practitioners, and just the beauty of having both of the energies there. Because yeah, sometimes we do need the warrior energy and really being courageous and facing and going through our fears. And sometimes we need more of the flowing, surrendering energy that could be more associated with the feminine. And so having both there is really beautiful. And then, learning um, also from women teachers, and it is a different energy. It's just different. It's not better or worse, just different. And um, for me, it's such a relief to be in a place where I feel strong in myself and the way that I practice, because being trained in the Shipibo tradition with a lot of strong men as leaders and facilitators, I had a warped sense of training, in that I didn't know that there was another way. I just learned the warrior way. And so, it was very tricky, and I wasn't sure I could actually continue on the path. And so it was only when I connected with the women leaders and was able to balance the energies out, and actually integrate them so that the masculine and feminine was very strong within myself. That now being in a place of like, okay, I found my own groove and my own flow, and luckily, having my first master teacher actually encouraging us to find our own way. So that is one of the most beautiful aspects that I had in the training, is that, yeah, we find our own way, and that we can integrate in other modalities, other healing modalities, and that also balancing the the energies in our external life, meaning that yes, we are in a lot of ceremonies and we have the vegetalismo practices and in the diet world, and in our own life in terms of, how do we integrate the teachings and connect with the larger community. What are our skill sets in terms of um, being loving beings with our partners and family members, and so having that balance in general in our life is, I would say, more of the feminine perspective.
Do you, uh, how do I start this question? How do you feel? Can you comment on the presence of sexual assault in the ayahuasca cultures in South America, and also maybe provide any tips or suggestions to women who might be called to doing this kind of work, and that they can remain safe in their choices to maybe go to Peru or just in general to invest in ayahuasca?
Yes, great question. One of the parts of my PhD research study was on interviewing women, and the shadow sexuality in terms of misuse of power in ceremony space and outside of ceremony space was a theme that came through that was very significant. And as more and more women felt safe and supported to discuss this issue, the more that community members at large were, being concerned and wondering how to address this issue. And, luckily, there are so many more people that are talking about this at conferences and on the aya.com and different websites, and the Visionary Women's Visionary Congress. I came out with I think 20 tips on keeping safe. And you can go to the Women's Visionary Congress website, and I think they have a link to that document. And so it's, basically being well prepared and getting the information about where you're going, like what retreat center you're going to, asking people for feedback on it, and the ayahuasquero, the leader of the ceremonies, getting feedback on that this person, and preparing well in terms of having a buddy system, when you're there, and you know this whole idea that and going um more and harder and deeper is better is so not true. It is so not true. I don't know how I can emphasize this enough. It's just like really to trust yourself and to go at your own pace. I truly believe that our bodies and our intuition are the supreme knowers. And so no one can tell you, that you're not doing it right, or you need to drink more, or, more times, or whatever. You really need to be mindful of who you're sitting with and who you, if eventually, choose as a teacher, and that you do feel that your voice, that your intuition is held in respect, and that it's a team effort. So there's the leader, there's you, and then there's the plant teachers that are all working together. And so if you don't feel that from the leader, then just find another one. There's no need to push yourself into something that just doesn't feel quite right. Now, I know often that there's a lot of fear that people have. Obviously, everyone has fear going into these ceremonies and going into this initiation journeys, and that's normal. So, what you really want to have is a support person, a guide, someone that you trust, that you can bounce ideas and feelings off of, because you want to discern what is your fear and projection onto others, and then what is, the truth and your true intuition and what it is that you need, and that that requires some uh, self knowledge, through tool building and reflection time. And so, whatever you can do to be well prepared before journeys, and then to ensure that whoever you're working with or whatever center you're going to, that there is some resource for integration afterwards in whatever form that takes. It doesn't mean it has to be down in South America, but to really set yourself up well can really maximize the benefits and minimize the harm, the possible harms.
And these suggestions really go for everyone, not just women as well, because the ayahuasca experience can be very challenging, especially when you're doing something as intense as taking, say, a pilgrimage to Peru to do so. And I'd really like to applaud you for saying or reinforcing the concepts of following your own pace and trusting your inner compass as to whether or not a certain depth of experience or intensity or frequency or even the practitioners are right for you. I think from the outside, a lot of people get the sense that maybe because it's ayahuasca and because there's this big cultural meme around it being a healing medicine plant, that means that those of us who do it, or those who do it a lot, have some sort of inherently more spiritual or evolved aspects to who they are, and that's really just not the case. And there's still a lot of peer pressure that happens, and still a lot of really unspiritually evolved or spiritually uninvolved actions being taken by a lot of people in ayahuasca culture. And so going in there and being really prepared seems very important, and great suggestions. I'll make sure to link to this article you mentioned, the 20 tips, in the show notes. Now, my next question seems like maybe I should have asked it earlier because it's such an obvious question, but we're talking a lot about sexuality here, and we're talking a lot about plant medicine, and in particular ayahuasca, and yet there's this whole premise around the ayahuasca diet saying no sex, which includes no sex with other people, and includes no masturbation or touching yourself. I think masturbation means something like to foul oneself. So instead of that term, let's say instead of self loving, and yet here's this large undercurrent of sexuality. Can you comment on the no sex concept of a dieta? Does that fit? Does that work? What are your thoughts?
Okay, yes, great. Okay, so we need to remember that we are tapping into a very strong indigenous tradition where sex is perceived a certain way, and that sexual energy is very, very strong. And the reason why they're saying no sex around ceremony time and during the diets is because this energy is so strong, it can supersede, anything that's happening with the more subtle plant energies. So it's really more of a sign of respect and actually maximizing the potential of learning through these plant teachers. So it's not necessarily, sex is bad, just like they're saying no salt or no sugar. No, that's not the point. It's really so that we can sensitize ourselves to open up to the other subtle energies. Now, because the sexual energy is perceived in a certain way through the traditions in South America, um, that we are entering into a new paradigm, and these vegetalismo traditions are being transmuted to meet the needs of, for myself, in North America, of North Americans, and also to integrate our Western mentality into the way that we perceive these practices. And so I want to make it clear that personally, the way that I work with people is not in the traditional Shipibo way. I mean, it cannot be, because I'm not in the jungle living there full time. So there's been a transmutation of the practices, and therefore um, uh, a renewed awakening of what sexual energy is and what it can be. And so for me, it makes sense that people do not have sexual activity as we know it in the more like material, like physical way, including self pleasuring, but that the beauty is that we are learning about sexual energy in the dozens of other realms that we usually don't have the space and the commitment to explore. And so it doesn't seem a paradox to me. It actually makes sense in that we are setting aside one form or one part of sexuality so that we can then focus on the other 11 parts of it. And in terms of the plant teachers, there is the understanding that sometimes these plant teachers can become our lovers, and that once you get more in the um, apprenticing realms, that there is some jealousy that can happen as well, and so you're navigating all these different layers, but that the plants are literally showing us that there are different forms of how to be sexually fulfilled, how to be authentic in our sexual expression. And so, this idea that in ceremony and diets, we're not supposed to think about sex or even have dreams that we're having sex, or, it's considered terrible. And I completely disagree. I would say that this is actually a perfect time for sexual healing, for bringing up these energies and releasing them, the sexual traumas, the sexual desires, and so really having the space to explore, like, what is that sexual desire, and then how do we channel that fuel, that's being ignited, so that we can actually be more creative and authentic in our lives.
I don't have as deep a work, especially in regards to into facilitating people in working with plant medicines. But I have to say that I fully agree with you there. I think it's very important that we are finding ways to work with self-discipline that is enabling us to be more liberated rather than to keep us repressed. And in regards to sexuality, I think that's very important. So to end off the episode here, I'm wondering if you would be open to sharing a personal experience of yours that felt meaningful and has been relevant to your journey, in particular with one of the plants that you work with.
Okay. This is easy. I have so many. The one that stands out is really seeing how I was before I connected with plants, and then what the plants have taught me and how I feel now, in terms of literally feeling present in my body and actually being able to feel pleasure. So, as a child experiencing sexual physical abuse, and then becoming numb, literally numb, as an adult, while I was having sexual relations with um, a partner, and not really realizing what was happening, what I was missing. And then really through the diets and the ceremonies, being able to flush the energy out of my body, and simply feel naturally um, possible in being present in my body, and then connecting with um, or feeling delight and pleasure and just like feeling plants in my hands or smelling, the air. It's just very simple, like, going for a swim and feeling the water in my body. Like, sensual liberation is what I feel was brought into my life again. And because I am present in my body, now being able to sit with another human being, a beloved romantic partner, and it's being present to the energy there and taking things slower and being really sensitive and following the energy of what's there. It just heightens everything to uh, more of a blissful experience. Plus, not to say it's all bliss, but just being able to also be aware of the continual, blocks and shadow pieces that are there that really want to be integrated in. So it's just this presence of awareness that can create such sensual and sexual freedom.
Hmm. Now, coming to the end here, I imagine that there's a lot of people listening that are inspired by what you have to say and are interested in excuse me, potentially reaching out to you to participate in some of the things that you have going on here. Can you give a little rundown on where people can get a hold of you and the different projects you have currently going that people can get involved with?
Yes. So you can go to yalila.com, YALILA.com, and you will see three different links to sites and to the different projects. So, what I have is a plant spirit shamanism training. It's a 3-month program, and this is where we can explore the plant teachers through not the traditional diets, but this is more contemporary plant spirit connection. 6 weeks that you get to connect with a local plant in your backyard, and then having the container of a group process, so you're feeling supported and learning a lot of tools and techniques to maximize your connection with the plant or tree. um, and then the other project is the sexual initiation, where it's a 3-month training as well, and we're going through the different energy centers and learning how to release and fortify your sexual energy, and bringing in tantric practices as well, so that you can connect more with yourself, with your beloved, and with nature in general. And ideally, one would take the time to have both of them, both of the plant spirit shamanism and the sexual initiation, because they are so complementary. And, in 6 months, being able to really heal sexual trauma and feel pleasure in your body and learn how to um, have spiritual, sexual experiences with your romantic partners.
Well, thank you very much, Yalila, for being on the show and for what you've offered here to the listeners, as well as what you're offering to the world at large and the people that you interact with. I think that it's really beautiful work, and it's well needed at this time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
For the listeners out there, you have just tuned into another episode of ATTMind Radio. Thank you very much for your time. If you really liked what you heard here, take an opportunity to go check out Yalila's links that are at the at jameswjesso.com. You'll find the show notes to this episode and ways to get a hold and connect with Yalila. And you could also give us a good review here on the iTunes. Search us out, leave us a comment. That's always super supportive. Or you could head to JWJ bit.ly slash ATTMind support to check out how you can support the podcast in other ways. Thank you again for listening, and have yourselves a wonderful day. Hey everyone, James here. This podcast and all of my writing is a passion project and brought to you by, well, you. If you believe in the value of what I'm offering, there's a few ways to support, such as following me on social media like Twitter or YouTube, or even just by telling a friend. Word of mouth goes a long way. If you really like what I'm offering and want to bring your support to the next level, please consider donating to the podcast via PayPal or Patreon, or you could buy a copy of one of my books. Head over to jameswjesso.com/support to find out more details. And thanks. If it wasn't for you, I couldn't do what I do.